Wait For It is a show about the way we feel about our bodies. Consequently, each episode may include references to gaining and losing weight, eating disorders, weight loss surgery, and weight stigma. If these topics are triggering to you, please take care while listening. We have links to support resources for anyone who may need them in our show notes. Wait for it.
This is the only body that you're going to get. You can't do anything about that. A lot of us are kind of socialized to feel shame about some parts of our bodies. And that is like, it's the cruelest thing, because this is the only body that you're going to get. You can't do anything about that.
That is the voice of Damon Young. He's a writer whose work I've followed for many years.
Author of What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker, co-founder of Very Smart Brothers, contributing opinion writer for New York Times, Washington Post, host of Stuck with Damon Young.
He started his podcast, Stuck with Damon Young, in 2022, and I'm a big fan. He has these long, poignant conversations with his friends and other luminaries on life, love, and anything else that he feels stuck on. He's a bit of an overthinker like me, so I've constantly been drawn to his work. I reached out to him to talk about dudes and friendship, which is related to today's episode. But what we ended up talking about was the root of the real issue, which is at the center of our story today: shame. Specifically, shame around our bodies.
For years, I felt shame about my teeth. I got teased about them a bit when I was a kid. I had a gap between my front teeth, and also my parents couldn't afford braces, so that was like another layer of shame. The shame of just not having much. And in America, teeth is a billboard that acknowledges class. If you watch like a cartoon, the villains usually have bad teeth. Like if someone has noticeably bad teeth, they are usually like a villain or meant to be like stupid.
Damon is stating something here that I know intimately. The idea that something was decided about the way we're supposed to look. It's always hard to determine the origin of that decision, but that decision about how we look, that judgment, it's echoed in our conversations, in our culture, and in our art. And as a result, those of us who exist outside of the decided standard, just trying to live our lives, now have to bear the shame. In this case, Damon is talking about his teeth and the messaging that comes with bad teeth in society, that it's inherently tied to flaws in character and low intelligence. Logically, most of us know that isn't true. We all know what they say about judging books by their covers. However, knowing what is logically true doesn't really stop us from passing judgment or making decisions based on how folks look. What we talk about even less is what that says about us as individuals and how we feel about ourselves.
I think that we have to have real conversations with ourselves about our own bodies. I think a lot of us are dealing with shit in our head, and that shit, impacts how we treat people.
While reflecting on what Damon said, my mind goes back a long time, back to when I was in college. In those days, I had a head full of shit I was dealing with, and it definitely impacted people. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and this is Wait For It. Waiting. Shame.
Bodies.
Wait for it. Wait for it. The wait, the shame. Waiting. Wait for it. I want to tell you about a new show from Radiotopia Presents that we're really excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Host Jess Shane puts out an open call on Craigslist for aspiring documentary subjects and selects 4 to work with. Together, they pull back the curtain on what really goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows, showing what it takes and what it costs to collect, edit, and consume stories about people's real lives. Radiotopia presents Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative, out now on your preferred podcast platform. Wait for it. I lived a pretty sheltered life and spent most of my childhood in church. My father was a minister and my mother a missionary. Both were former military and had spent a good portion of their youth partying and having a good time before they met each other, joined the church, got saved, and started a family. As a result, they overcorrected in a lot of ways. They were intent on making sure that my older sister Marilyn and I would never make what they felt were mistakes when they were our age. So in addition to being at church a lot, we weren't really allowed to do most extracurricular activities, things like homecoming dances, spring flings, and proms. We weren't really allowed to hang out with other kids outside of interactions during school hours. There were some exceptions. By the time I was in high school, I got to participate in things like marching band and student government, but those activities were restricted to whatever the agreed upon hours were. My parents checked with my teacher. If an event ended at 4 p.m., they were outside ready to pick me up at 4 p.m. And it wasn't just my parents. Church had an impact on me. As a church teenager, I often felt the allure of wanting to just be a teen, but was riddled with the guilt of doing the wrong thing. I didn't feel free to explore my youth, whether that meant in normal socialization and friendships or in romance. I snuck in all of my firsts. My first kiss was after school while waiting on the late bus. My second real kiss was after a band concert in the hallway while teachers and parents were milling about in the auditorium. And while every first was exciting, I still felt guilty about sneaking around and kissing girls when I was supposed to be home and chaste. So college was going to be quite the opportunity for me, and I was eager to get out of my parents' house. I really wanted to be unsupervised and have the full opportunity to explore myself and my relationships with women. When I arrived in college in 2002, I was a very different Ronald. I was 5'9" and 200 pounds. I was often described as stocky, but never fat. Now, my sheltered upbringing created a list of standards for an imaginary woman that I would meet, fall in love with, marry, and then lose my virginity to. They had to be black, with a nice body, good-looking, church-going, high-achieving, supportive of my ideologies and goals, family-minded, a wife type. That's who I was supposed to be with. Then I met Caitlin.
We met in class. I think you took a liking to me right away.
Caitlin had long brown hair, a face full of freckles, and a cute smile. We were in English 101 together. We met during the first 2 weeks of school at Virginia Commonwealth University, or VCU, in Richmond, Virginia. We pretty quickly discovered that we had mutual acquaintances because we were both from Northern Virginia, but had attended separate high schools. Caitlin was funny and opinionated and just fun. We were constantly talking and laughing together in class.
I remember I liked your energy. You were very out there, very boisterous. You got attention. You spoke up. You weren't shy. I liked that. I thought you were cute.
We discovered that we lived in the same dorm building, and while I don't remember the exact moment that started it, I do remember that we started hooking up. It was great. We would talk on AIM, remember AIM? And I would go from my 3rd floor room to her 7th floor room, and more firsts for me would happen. This was all very exciting for me because we really liked each other, and we had great chemistry, both in our conversations and physically. We were young college co-eds doing young college co-ed things. It felt good seeing her, and we were enjoying ourselves.
When it was just the two of us, it was great. We got along. We were compatible, I think. Our sense of humor worked well together.
And it did. But this isn't a love story.
You'd always sneak down to my room. You'd always be late, or when you could sneak down there when nobody else was around, even my roommates or my friends. Like, you didn't want them to know either, because then it would get out.
Caitlin was fat, and I didn't want anyone to know that I was attracted to her. About 2 weeks before I met Caitlin, before classes even started, I became friends with a group of guys who mostly all lived in my dorm. I was excited to experience friendship not restricted by school hours. Friendship for us meant playing basketball and video games regularly, eating together at the dining hall, shout out to Hibbs, and of course, checking out and talking about girls. We were always ranking the girls. Who was the hottest physically? Who compared against who? All of that. In all of this comparison, what would happen in our minds is that we began to judge each other based on our likes and dislikes or preferences. Being 18, that bit of comparison can get messy. It's not as refined as, she's not my type, or I prefer brunettes. What actually ended up happening was, ew, her? Are you serious? To be attracted to someone fat was an indicator that something was wrong with you. You weren't normal. When I met Caitlin, I was immediately attracted to her, even before we started talking. Her weight was a non-issue for me, but talking to and hanging out with my friends had an impact on me. I really wanted to fit in, to be a normal guy hanging with the fellas. So despite really liking Caitlin and loving how she made me feel, she fell short of the standards I set for myself, now reinforced with the opinions of my new friendships.
Even though our groups didn't really, we didn't really associate, but, when we'd see each other in public and you were with your guys or I was out, there was no real interaction how we normally would alone.
I was used to keeping secrets, especially about anything I'd done sexually. In high school, there was always the risk of my parents finding out, but now I didn't want my friends to find out. I don't remember exactly how they figured it out. Maybe I had talked to her too long in the dining hall, or maybe they caught us exchanging glances on the patio of the dorm. But once they noticed that some connection between us existed, the teasing began. There was random laughter and not explaining what was funny. Then her name became a bit of a trump card in our conversations. If we were talking about women and I said anything, that someone would mention her name or, but you like them bigger, don't you, Ron? And everyone would laugh. And the problem wasn't just the teasing, but I wasn't exactly sure what I was supposed to do with it. I never felt like we were laughing together. And despite them saying, hey man, we're just kidding, I never exactly knew how I was supposed to be in a relationship when everyone seemingly close to me was making fun of me for being in it.
So are you and the village people going to the reunion? And by village people, I mean your...
There was a television show out in those days in one of its earlier seasons called The League. It depicted a group of adult friends who played in a fantasy football league together. Generally, it was a bunch of horrible people being horrible to each other, but there was one episode about their high school reunion in which this exchange happens.
You know this guy in high school? He loved bigger girls.
I don't know what he's talking about.
You know what he used to call this guy in high school? He used to call him the herdsman. Because the girls were so big, they actually resembled actual cattle. He'd run around.
I remember when this episode came out because me and my friends used to watch it, and one of them suggested that they started using that nickname, the herdsman, for me. It was kind of a running joke. Ronald likes fat girls. And as a young, impressionable adult, I didn't have the confidence nor even the language to really respond in a constructive way. So instead, I tried to hide Caitlin. I only saw her at night. I tried to limit my time around her if I thought I would run into friends. But despite my best or worst efforts, my friends knew. And every chance they got, they teased me for it. I should have just liked who I liked and said it with my chest. But there's something uniquely hurtful about people laughing, joking, or straight up saying to your face, the person you like is unattractive and you're weird for liking them. And the truth is that now, in a lot of ways, I understand that as a young person, I was very self-centered. Everything was about how I felt or what I wanted. So it was hard to recognize that in trying to make myself feel better, I was actively hurting Caitlin. I understand that now emotionally, and I sympathize with Caitlin. But now I'm fat, and I understand it physically, and I empathize with Caitlin in a way that I don't feel like I deserve to. Caitlin and I have known each other for just over 20 years now. And like most folks who've known each other for an extended time, we had moments where we were talking and when we weren't talking to each other as much. I'm not the same person that I was in 2002. And every year that passed since our earliest interactions, I felt more and more guilty about the way that I treated Caitlin. We've kept in touch throughout the years, and as we started comparing notes on our experiences, I realized that Caitlin also had shit going on in her mind that was impacting both how she viewed herself and the relationship choices she made. Caitlin's view of herself and the world was shaped at a very early age.
Probably like first, second grade. I felt bigger than the girls, even though I wasn't huge at that time. Like, I had roles that the other girls didn't have. And my father was very critical of my weight pretty much my entire life until this day. He'll still say stuff.
As Caitlin got older, she got more strategic about the ways in which she dressed and interacted with the world.
I was very conservative with how I dressed. I didn't like wearing bathing suits, although I loved the water and swimming. And I wore these long jean skirts that covered I had no shape, but I thought that hid me.
She went to a private high school, and there were a lot of well-to-do folks and people who just cared about the way they looked. Comparison quickly turned to judgment, and not only judgment of skinny folks, but of other fat folks.
So when I cover myself and I see somebody that's dressed with their legs showing or stomach, I'm like, ooh, why are they wearing that? Especially somebody of size. It makes me judge them. It makes me look at them like, why aren't you covering that? I'm like, oh, girls shouldn't have been wearing that.
Some folks call this projection. Others internalize fat phobia. But either way, Caitlin hated that she was fat, and as a result, hated seeing other fat folks that weren't doing as good a job concealing their bodies as she was.
It makes me uncomfortable because maybe it makes me jealous, honestly. I wish I had that confidence. Like, I wish I felt good enough about myself to show myself off.
That was who Caitlin was when she met me. A Ronald that was measuring her against his unreasonably specific standards. A Ronald who was so occupied about his own experience that he had no room to be concerned with how Caitlin felt.
I felt like a secret. I felt you were ashamed of the way I looked. And that was why. Because I was cute. I knew I was cute. I knew I was pretty in the face. I knew I had a good sense of humor. I knew I had a good personality. I figured it was all physical. That's the whole, so I felt ashamed of how I looked. And I always had. I mean, that wasn't something that was new.
That wasn't the first time Caitlin has said that to me. The first time she said it, we were on the phone catching up mid-2021. I remember she said, "You were ashamed of me." She said it directly like that. I was quiet for a while because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if an apology would be enough. Caitlin and I talked sporadically over the years, but we never talked about why it didn't work out for us in 2002. As young people, we just understood that things fizzle out. But as full-grown adults, with the experiences we were acknowledging and giving space for some real feelings, there was a lot of guilt for me and a lot of shame for Caitlin. To confront it in that moment, sitting on my couch as a fat man, I felt I understood in a way I had never before. I've apologized to Caitlin a lot, and we've reconciled as friends, but when I started making this show, I realized that I couldn't talk about being fat without facing the ways in which I interacted with fat people in the past.
But you weren't the first man that made me feel like a secret, so.
Do you remember the earliest time that you felt like that?
I was 15. I was working at Splashdown Water Park in Manassas, and I was hooking up with my boss. So obviously that was not okay. But, he was a college kid and he wanted me, and I was a sophomore in high school, and, he was this soccer star and I was this fat girl. So that was the first. That was the first time. You were the second.
When Caitlin said I wasn't the first guy to make her feel like a secret, it felt like a reprieve at first, because it's like she was already familiar with the reasons why she was being mistreated. Like, Ronald, don't worry about this. I know what was happening, and you didn't originate this behavior. That's not who I want to be, but it's also not who I want to have been. And listening to Caitlin now, I'm noting the way that she talks about herself, like earlier when she mentioned she was pretty in the face, or just now when she called herself this fat girl. It's not different from the way that she talks about other fat people either. She doesn't have much sympathy for them. She has even less for herself.
I mean, nobody wanted a relationship with me. People knew I was weak and would take what I could get. There was one guy that I met, and we had a relationship going for a little while. Like, it wasn't anything serious. It wasn't anything exclusive. It was what he would give me, bits and pieces at a time. I mean, he didn't take me out with his friends. Obviously, I went back internal, and it was like, well, it has to be the way I look. Because I know I'm funny, I know I'm cute. And so I settled. I settled for what I could get, for just the little scraps. And I looked for the attention and affection of men to validate how I felt, to validate that I was good and I was pretty and I was okay. And it was always the wrong man.
Caitlin felt like because she was fat, she was getting what she deserved. I really hate that I was a part of that. If you've ever felt confused or frustrated by health information, which, let's be real, who hasn't, then I have a podcast for you. It's called Food, We Need to Talk. And it's hosted by Una Jatta and Dr. Eddie Phillips, an associate professor at Harvard Medical School. In every episode, Una and Eddie talk to experts in the fields of nutrition, exercise, neurobiology, and more to figure out the truth about metabolism, weight, health, and what we should actually be doing to look and feel our best. Find Food, We Need to Talk wherever you get your podcasts. Wait for it. As freshman year continued, Caitlin and I spent a lot of time together. But eventually that time began to dwindle as we focused on other things like going to class and maintaining our friendships with other folks.
I actually left freshman year with a 3.2. So I did well. I went to class. I was on campus. And so I had this group of girls. We were really close. And we decided we're all going to move in together. We found a place.
By our sophomore year in 2003, Caitlin had moved off campus. I moved to upper class housing, still on campus, with my friends from freshman year. I became a security guard at the dorm I used to live in. Caitlin and I talked, and sometimes still hooked up, but not as regularly. By that time, I felt a little more adjusted to college life. But Caitlin had begun to struggle with hers.
I went to class most of maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month or so. And then I just stopped going. My insecurities of walking into a room and finding a seat, everybody staring at me because I was a big girl and I just was so embarrassed of how I looked and being out in public. That self-confidence was just super low. So I stopped going to class. I stayed in the house and was a homebody. And then grades started coming in. And I was going to get my shit together and I didn't. And then I had to, VCU asked me to leave.
Caitlin left VCU in 2004 and she moved to Maryland to live with her parents. I didn't realize Caitlin had left school until one time I texted and she mentioned that she was gone. I was entering my junior year and had become a resident assistant. I was still close with that group of friends from freshman year, but I spent less regular time with them. I wasn't nearly as concerned with their judgments as I once had been. This was at the onset of social media, specifically Facebook, and by then I was just an observer of Caitlin's life through pictures and updates. The pattern of choosing the wrong man continued for her.
I went back up to my parents in Maryland and online dating because it was easy and I was shy and I didn't do the bars because I didn't drink at that time, really, hardly at all. And so I met a man that put all this stuff that he was so great out there, and come to find out he was a drug addict who was living with his mom and was abusive and stole and cheated, all kinds of stuff. But I still couldn't let go of that because he showed me the love that I felt I needed at that time.
Caitlin felt like her weight was at the root of all the problems she was experiencing. While navigating this relationship, she was introduced to the idea of weight loss surgery.
My mom wanted to go to like this conference, I guess. They were putting on a presentation. And I went with her, and I was 20 years old, really young, but I was very heavy. I was at my heaviest. And she was going for her, so I was just there to support. And the doctor saw me, and he kind of pulled us both aside, and we were all talking. And I was basically a perfect candidate. My BMI was super high. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I had no other health issues.
By 2006, she started the insurance process to seek approval for weight loss surgery.
I wanted the surgery to look good. I wanted to look good because I thought it would make me feel good on the inside.
And then, in the middle of this abusive relationship,
I got approved for weight loss surgery. And I had the surgery.
Caitlin's body started to change rapidly.
I'm losing weight like crazy. Like, I dropped weight so quick because I was, in great health, young, active. And then once I did drop some weight, I let him go because I knew I looked good. And I knew I was like, this was the person I was meant to be. This is what I should have looked like all along. And then I decide I don't want to live with my parents anymore. And my sister's moving back to country. And so I'm going to go live with her.
No more being a homebody. She wanted to be out and about.
I got a job at a restaurant, and I looked great, and I was skinny, and I was young and pretty. Like, my body finally matched my face, I felt like. And so I started binge drinking. Like, I started going out and partying a lot. No drugs, nothing like that. Just going out and getting pretty shit-faced.
I watched all this unfold on Facebook. Seeing that Caitlin had lost a lot of weight made me feel even more guilty about the way I treated her when she was fat. Some of this was me projecting. By this time, it was around 2007, and I had just left college. I was thinking about my own weight all the time because I wasn't as small as I used to be, and people loved to remind me. I remember at church this one time, one of the mothers stopped me and said, "How could you get so round?" Another one stopped my mom and said, "You need to put that boy on a diet." I was working in a cubicle every day in a job I hated. I wasn't as optimistic about my future as I'd once been. Seeing Caitlin be out and about and partying with her friends was a sort of revenge for having been the fat girl for so long. She never said this to me directly, but every time I saw her pictures, it felt like she was saying to me, "I'm not a secret anymore." By 2008, Caitlin had lost 130 pounds, met a Marine, and married him. She felt like physically she was exactly where she was supposed to be, and she got exactly the man she wanted. My outlook on life was quite different than what it used to be. I didn't feel like I had much direction, and with every pound I gained, I started to feel a palpable sense of shame. Not just from looking in the mirror, but also from everyone around who kept reminding me that I was gaining weight. By 2014, Caitlin had 2 kids and seemed really happy on Facebook. By 2016, I was fully a fat person and struggling with that realization. I constantly felt ashamed of myself because I felt like I failed at being straight-sized. Any negative event that happened to me seemed to compound those feelings, even things that had nothing to do with my weight. I'd been laid off from an IT job and temporarily started working as a coffee barista. I was in a car accident and was without a car for 7 years by then. I felt like a loser. I was 32 in a retail job, basically broke, depending on public transportation. Everything I learned from TLC as a teenager dictated that I was indeed a scrub. I was deeply ashamed of myself. None of this is stuff I posted on Facebook. It was embarrassing. Why would I post that? So I tried to stick to good news or uplifting posts. Around this time, I noticed I was seeing less of Caitlin herself online. Sure, I was seeing pictures of her kids, and it seemed like she had moved on and was in a new relationship, but I wasn't seeing much of her anymore.
Looking in a mirror, I could physically see that I was thin, but I felt almost 300 pounds still because the weight dropped so quickly, and I never took the time to deal with any of the emotional issues I had based on the weight.
And it wasn't just the weight. Caitlin had a tough time with her second pregnancy, which led to a different problem.
I had my second daughter in 2010, and there was a lot of complications, and I was prescribed a pain medication. And that's where, other than food being my first addiction, that was, a substance addiction for me. And I abused it when I could get it.
Over the next few years, Caitlin would begin abusing prescription drugs, then alcohol. She would divorce her husband and enter a tumultuous relationship with a new man. It was a toxic on-again, off-again relationship, but by 2018, Caitlin would have 2 more kids with him. Struggling in the relationship, she continued to drink and abuse prescription drugs. She got a few DUIs, and her kids were taken away from her. She was even homeless briefly. And this wasn't something she would post on Facebook. As it turns out, I wasn't the only one who rarely saw Caitlin anymore. She rarely saw herself either.
I couldn't look myself in the mirror. I couldn't remember the last time I had looked in the mirror at myself. And I had an apartment at that time. Like, I could have, but one day I woke up and I looked in the mirror, and it was after like a 3-week binge where I thought I was going to die in my apartment. And I looked at my front door, and people had left flowers. Like, it was like my grave site. And I looked in the mirror and I said, I can't fucking do this anymore. And so I started working a program.
She started on the path of recovery and joined Alcoholics Anonymous. She eventually would leave her toxic relationship and rejoin the lives of her children. By the time Caitlin and I were more regularly checking in with each other in 2020 and 2021, I was in a different place with my body. I had begun to engage in more fat liberation spaces. I was trying to give myself grace and think differently about what it was to be fat. I didn't always get it right, see episode 1, but I was trying to be better for myself and everyone around me. I was working full-time as an audio producer. I bought a car. I didn't feel like a scrub nearly as much as I did before. Caitlin caught me up on the rest of her life, and it felt like a wild ride.
How do you reconcile those memories now, whether it be me or anybody else, where you felt like it was you were getting scratched from folks? What's your relationship with those memories now?
So I'm an alcoholic, and I'm in AA, and in AA we do steps. So you work through your damage, your defects, your assets, all that stuff. So what I've done, the way I'm reconciling that is it's a 4th step. And it's where I write down everything, every resentment to anyone I've ever had. You're on that list.
Hearing Caitlin say that was a confirmation for me. Throughout the years, I felt like a lot of the ways I experienced rejection in life and in love could be traced back to the ways I rejected others, especially the way that I treated Caitlin. I always held on to the guilt that doing the wrong thing was manifesting as the existential obstacles I kept facing. What would have happened if I weren't ashamed of being associated with Caitlin, a fat girl? How could our lives have been potentially different?
Looking back on it, I always felt like I was treating you in a lot of ways the way most people treat fat people, which is like you're not a
less than.
Yeah, you're less than, and your life isn't going to start until you lose weight.
Right.
How significant are those moments in your life between you and I? How significant are they when you compare them to the rest of your life?
I have thought about it, like throughout the years, you'll post something or I'll see your name somewhere, and I'll be like, oh, that could have been good. We could have had how many years? 19 years? 20. Almost 20 years. We could have been married with how many kids? And obviously, we weren't dating. We just, whenever we get together. But I think there could have been potential there. But no, you didn't ruin my life. You didn't destroy Caitlin. But you were definitely, when I wrote down my resentment list, you were definitely part of a pretty big pattern I had. But I do think there could have been potential there if we had actually dated and not just been hookups. Yeah.
Sitting in front of Caitlin as a fat person, I can't help but feel at my most insecure. We're not dating, no romantic intentions between us. We're just people reminiscing and comparing notes on the ways that our lives connected and diverged. Even though it seems that Caitlin has forgiven and absolved me, I still carry a sense of responsibility for her feelings. I couldn't foresee that the tables would turn and that my feelings on weight and love would change, and someday we'd be sitting here talking about it. These are the feelings that weigh on me when I'm sitting in front of Caitlin now, and it's these feelings that make me want to ask the question, do you feel a sense of vindication now that I'm sitting in front of you as a fat man? But I was too scared to ask that question directly, and instead, I asked it in the most roundabout of ways. Forgive the audio, I was off mic when I asked.
I guess, for me, from the outside looking in, looking at you and your journey, I think about from the beginning, the way that I factor in, especially since you mentioned me being on your list of, what did you call it?
Resentments.
Yeah, your list of resentments. And I remember also, looking at that and remembering our interactions then. I'm going to ask you a very tough question, but you have to answer honestly. And it might be at the expense of the person sitting in front of you now. So you, when I met you, I was thin. Mm-hmm. Now I'm sitting in front of you, I'm fat. How do you feel about that?
How do I feel about you? Physically?
Being fat. How do you feel there's a guy that's on your resentments list who is now sitting in front of you as a fat person? Mm-hmm. Do you have any feelings about that? And my hypothesis is that you do, but I don't know if you would actually say it, which is why I wanted to ask.
Okay. So about you, I don't feel differently as far as friendship or anything like that. I worked through that. But physically, I wouldn't date you now. I wouldn't be attracted to you. I think I said last time I'm not attracted to overweight men, and that's just how I feel. I would not see you out and be like, "Ooh, yeah." I just wouldn't.
That's fair.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
You said to be honest.
To be honest, I appreciate it.
I'm not so naive to think that Caitlin is the one that got away. We probably would have ended up going our separate ways for various reasons. But I never really gave her a chance. She's not the only woman I didn't give a fair shot because they didn't fit the mold that I had for partnership in my mind. When I was younger, I thought that the opportunity to love and be loved came far more often than it actually does. In college, I felt ashamed to be associated with Caitlin because she was fat. Caitlin felt ashamed of herself because she was fat. She settled for the scraps she could get because she felt like she was getting what she deserved. I understand this now because I'm fat, and I know that I bear part of the responsibility for making Caitlin feel worse about herself. I bear the full responsibility for every opportunity I let slip away because I was a coward. My guilt has now turned to shame. I feel like I'm getting exactly what I deserve. Caitlin is much happier now. We still talk from time to time.
I am happy with my life. Life is good today. It's a little boring, but boring is way better than the chaos I was wrapped up in. I have a supportive partner that I have a healthy relationship with. I have a relationship with all of my children now. I got to see my little kids, and we're building that, and it's been going better than I could have ever imagined. I have a good job. I've sort of found my people in AA, in Alcoholics Anonymous. They're family. They are people that show up when I need them, or I show up when they need me. And I have people in my life that are going to tell me the truth. not just sit on a bar stool and tell me what I want to hear. And they don't care what I look like. They really don't. It's all in my head.
Caitlin has acknowledged that she has a lot of work to do with what she calls her defects, her self-image, and how that impacts the way she views people. She still feels uncomfortable in her body and wants to lose weight. We actually have that in common, wanting to lose weight. So maybe I'll give it a shot. Next week. Wait For It is a production of Oh It's Big Ron Studios and is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, creator-owned, listener-supported podcasts. Discover audio with vision at radiotopia.fm. This episode was produced and written by me, Ronald Young Jr., with editing from Sarah Deely. Sound design and mixing from the Reverend John Delore of Starlight Diner. Show and episode art by Heather Wilder. Theme music from Jey Red, with additional music from Mass Potential, The Artist DT, and the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Special thanks to Damon Young and Caitlin Scanlon. You can follow me on Twitter, Threads, Instagram, and TikTok at Oh It's Big Ron. That's at OHITSBIGRON. You can find out more about this show and other Oh It's Big Ron Studio shows by following us on Instagram at Oh It's Big Ron Studios and on Twitter at Oh It's Big Ron Stew. That's STEW. If you have a story about weight you'd like to share with us, shoot us an email at wait@ohitsbigron.com. That's WEIGHT@ohitsbigron.com. Wait For It will be back next week. Thanks for listening. Wait For It.
I don't know. It's my preference. It's what I like. I like a man that's more, typically I like tall men. That's usually tall, dark, and handsome is what and
How tall are you?
I'm just under 5'3".
Okay, keep going.
Radiotopia from P